Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Gunpowder Hill. Every year, during a period from 1946 to 1952, the residents of a small town in western Germany heard what resembled a six-gun salute. On the 15th of every March, some residents made frequent trips into the surrounding hills in hopes of finding the source of the noise. But to no avail, the townsfolk eventually named the area Gunpowder Hill. The children of the town even created a legend about it, stating that soldiers, who in that time were missing, had been executed and were buried somewhere in the hill. The purpose of the six-gun salute was to guide people to the location of the men. On the 15th of March every year, the children would gather at the edge of town, eagerly awaiting the 6 gunshots to be heard. In late 1951, the hills on the outskirts of the small German town were surveyed for the future construction of an NATO military site. The military base was to consist of a series of deep underground bunkers and weapons supplies in the case of a Soviet invasion. In February 1952, construction began just 4 weeks later. The crew began digging a massive 200-foot deep hole for the future underground storage bunkers. It was during this time that the crew made a morbid discovery. As they neared the end of the digging operation, a human hand was seen sticking out of the bottom of the hole. Upon future examination, 27 bodies were discovered at the bottom of the 200-foot deep hole, dressed in prisoner-of-war uniforms worn by the Allies in Nazi war camps. A NATO officer ordered for the bodies to be exhumed immediately. As the medical team watched the bodies being carried out of the hole, they looked on in puzzlement. The bodies were remarkably well preserved. Furthermore, the POW uniforms bore a strange insignia, unlike any the men had seen before, an orange circle with a single black dash in the middle. However, the most unsettling characteristic was the faces. Their eyes were wide open, and their mouths were sealed shut with an unknown adhesive. The bodies were immediately dispatched to the local morgue for identification and pathological examination. That night, the local mortician began his work. He found it difficult to concentrate on his task. The eyes of the first man he was to begin work on seemed to be staring back at him. The mortician took his scalpel and began his first cut. Blood poured out of the incision with staggering force. The mortician backed away from the table. In shock, the red liquid began running down the table. Pooling on the floor below the eyes of the body began watering, and streaks of tears ran down its face soon. Its eyes rolled back into its head. The bleeding ceased in horror. The mortician ran to the door, but not before catching a glance at the 26 other bodies lying out on separate tables. Their eyes stared at him with hopeless fear. The men were still alive. The second story, Predictive Illuminati card game, Virus Nuke, and Pentagon cards from the Illuminati card game. To start off, I would like to say that this card game really exists, and it can be bought. I didn't make these things up. This article is based on facts. You can decide for yourself if you want to believe that it is a theory and we're all gonna die. But you can't deny that this card game can't be coincidence. Before telling the whole story, you need to know what the Illuminati is. If you already know it, you can skip this paragraph. If you don't know it, it is useful to read this. A short explanation of the Illuminati, also known as the New World Order, is that it is a conspiracy theory. It all begins with the May, as you probably know, about their prediction that the world will end in 2012. However, The world won't end in 2012. But the fifth major cycle will end in 2012. And that means a big change. Believers of the conspiracy theory say that the Illuminati will start to rebuild the world in 2012. Their main goal is to reduce the world population and create a better world by doing that. Now that you know what the Illuminati is, I'd explain yet another coincidence. My previous story was about the Illuminati and Denver Airport. It all started in 1995. Stephen Jackson decided to make a new type of card game called Illuminati. When the game was completed, something weird happened. The American government tried to stop the game from being marketed. The reason never came out well. A few years later, things became clear. 6 years after the release of the card game, something terrible happened. Planes crashed into the World Trade Center as a result of a terrorist attack. Many people died. The card game exactly predicted this. Have a look at this card. Even the position is correct. Another terrorist attack that everyone remembers is the disaster at the Pentagon. The card game predicted that too. And do you remember the BP oil spill? Yes, the game knew that it would happen. Have a look at their oil spill card. You can see contaminated water, a sinking ship, and a bird that's dying because of the oil, as well as the cards I mentioned before. These things happen to reduce the world population, and the Illuminati would have made them happen. Could these be the reasons why the government didn't want it to be published? What does the game predict to happen in the future? Does it predict the end of the world? The game definitely raises questions, and that's good for the sales. But how could someone knew this would happen? You might wonder what the Illuminati card game holds for us in the future. I'll tell you about the most remarkable cards, because there are too many to talk about. There's one card that says World War III. It says that there would be another world war, but in this one nuclear weapons will be used. It sounds logical that if there would be another world where those weapons would be used, because there was a threat of a nuclear war before between Russia and the Warsaw and the USA and the rest of NATO. And there are more nuclear weapons than in the past world wars, and of course they have been developed. You can also find a card that says your goal is population reduction, and that of course is the Illuminati's goal under the picture. In the explanation of the card, it says, too many people making too many problems and not enough love. The Illuminati is the reduction as the solution for those problems. And there is also a rewriting history card, the Illuminati University card, the end of the world card, and many more remarkable cards. The third story, I don't sleep anymore. House and Rain. Earlier this week, on Sunday night, I had a dream in which I knew I was asleep. I was standing outside of my house in torrential rain at night, and thought I needed to get inside in order to wake up. I approached the front door and placed my knuckles onto the door window, ready to knock. I knew that my next action would bring me one step closer to consciousness. The moment I knocked on the door, the thudding sound of the knock was so loud, so frightening and so real that it woke me from my sleep. B.A. B.N.G. B.A. I jumped up immediately and listened out for a further knock at the door. I was roasting hot, sweating profusely, and my heart was beating so hard. I don't think I would have been able to tell the difference between a knock at the door and my thudding heartbeat after I came to my senses and realized that the possibility of the door knocking at the exact moment of dreaming it is incredibly low. I fell back to sleep. Monday, the following night, I had the same dream right back outside the front of the house in the pouring rain again, intensely staring at the house. I slowly walked to the front door. This time, It was open. I walked in and went straight into the kitchen. I opened the cutlery drawer and pulled out the largest meat knife I have. I looked into my reflection through the blade of the knife. If you stare directly into the reflection of your eyes for long enough, eventually it will hit you that someone is looking at you. You know it's your reflection, but for just a second, you forget and become self-conscious, as if it's somebody else behind your reflection's eyes. It didn't take a second of looking at my reflection through the blade to realize that somebody else was looking back. The moment I realized it was somebody else wearing my grin in the reflection, I slammed the cutlery drawer shut. Bang! Again. I shot up out of bed. The sound of the metal clanging in the drawer as it abruptly closed was so defined and so crystal clear. It couldn't have been a dream. Really spooked this time. I went downstairs into the kitchen. I was half asleep and had to check. I opened the cutlery drawer. I was relieved to find the knife still in the drawer. I closed it and went back to bed. It took a little longer this time, but I fell asleep. Tuesday night, my dream started with that grin in the reflection. From the look in his eyes, I could tell that the man in the reflection knew. He was looking back at someone confused and scared. I found myself looking into the reflection of the knife, already in my hand, while I stood outside of my house in the rain. The front door was open again. I walked into the house, directly up the stairs and into my bedroom. I looked at the bed and saw someone sleeping in it. It was me. I knew what I was going to do, but also knew that I couldn't stop myself. Instead, I kept thinking over and over again, wake up. My emotions were both into extremes at once. I was terrified, but at the same time, I was thrilled and excited to kill. WAK, he shot right out of bed and stood up. I was absolutely drenched in sweat, roasting hot, but relieved to find nobody stood in front of me with a knife. It took a few seconds to realize that I was gripping something tight in my hand. I knew what it was even before I looked down at it and saw my reflection in it. It was the meat knife, and this time the reflection in it looked terrified. I don't sleep anymore.